everybody, and welcome to another 80's golden age of comedy. I'm your host, Bruce Starr, and all this started. I know it's a shock when my guests hear this, but all this started 40 years ago. 40 years ago. And we're talking about 1981 and the improvisation on Melrose Avenue was the hit of the country. They started shooting a show called Evening at the Improv, and the improvisation went from being a place where we hung out, sat with everybody, all the comedians, sitting with everybody else, agents, managers, producing, just having a very nice experience. Everybody going in and watching the comedians at times and just having a really great time. And for me, getting to know all the comedians was an incredible opportunity. I was just a guy from Boston who drove out to LA to be in the entertainment industry. And my friend took me on the doorstep of the Improv and said, go in there and that's where you're going to live. And that's where I got to meet and work with dozens of stand-up comedians, incredible talents, many of them before they were known to the world, many of them before Evening at the Improv hit the mainstream, and comedy clubs opened up all over the country, and they wanted stand-up comedians that we were all hanging out with, and it was just a perfect opportunity for me to say, hey, Sue Kolinsky, can I make those calls for you? I know you don't want to make those calls to the comedy club, and I know your big-time agents at William Morris or ICM don't want to make those calls. Can I make those calls for you?
Yes, and thank you. Bruce, I'm honored to be a part of it. I always had fond memories of hanging out with you in LA. You were the one of the stable guys. I saw you every night for years. And when I found out that you were doing this, I was like, oh God, I'd do this in a heartbeat. So
well, tell me about your family life and where you grew up and
okay.
What
So
was that like?
I grew up in Belmore, Long Island, which is the South Shore of Long Island, right? It's like 40 minutes outside of Manhattan. And I am the youngest of five. I'm
Wow.
sure that had a lot to do with me being a comedian. My parents actually had a good sense of humor, and we had a lot of comedy albums in the house growing up. So I listened to Flip Wilson, Alan Sherman.
Oh,
I went to summer camp for 6 years.
me
So
too. 6 years. Where'd you go?
yeah, I went to a camp called Camp Saskatchewan, which was upstate New York in the Adirondack Mountains, not far from Lake George and Lake Placid.
Ah, okay. I went to Camp Winston. It was on Sackett Lake in Monticello for 6 years.
Oh, okay. And the biggest claim to fame of this camp was it was across the lake from Billy Graham had a religious camp,
Oh my God.
but that scenery it was on Scroon Lake. It was used for the film Marjorie Morningstar.
Uh-huh.
So one of my favorite movies. So anyway,
But can I tell you about my claim to fame at Camp Winston? When I was either 5 or 6, and I think it was 5, I had a great sleepaway camp counselor. His name was Marty Nadler. Marty Nadler got together with Gary Marshall and helped write all of Laverne and Shirley's and Happy Days.
oh
And
wow.
the next year, my camp counselor was Warren Murray, and it was Jan Murray's son. So I was around that. I didn't know anything about it,
Uh-huh.
nothing, but I was surrounded by that even from a very young age.
Yeah, so my parents actually had a friend growing up, and it's so funny because their daughter. His name was Mac Robbins, and Mac was a Borscht Belt comedian, but he was kind of like the B team. He wasn't as big as Alan King and
Shecky Green or
Shecky Green and that whole crowd, Dick Shawn.
mhm.
But he was very, very funny, and he, you know, he made a great living, but just most people didn't know him unless you went to the Catskills all the time.
Right.
And he was kind of an influence to me because I got to see him when I was a kid.
Wow.
And and I was like, oh my God, you can actually make money telling jokes. But I would say what really influenced me the most was the Ed Sullivan Show, because Alan King. I grew up a huge Alan King fan, and because he was Jewish and his stories were so personal, it really resonated with what my life was all about, and you know, like all my friends, you know. So um, and then you know, watching the Tonight Show with Carson, of course, which was way too late for my bedtime, but I used to sneak downstairs and sit on the landing, and I could kind of peek into the den and see some of the show. My parents had no idea I was there. So watching, who did I, like guys like Frank Gorshin,
Ah.
because I don't want to get ahead of myself, but all right. So guys like Frank Gorshin, and David Fry.
Oh my God.
Um,
Yeah.
I loved all the impressionists because I I learned how to do impressions when I was a little kid. My parents bought that album, The First Family. Do you remember that with Von
Oh my
Meter?
God. So this is really funny because, I've done about 28 shows now. And I'd say half the people have mentioned growing up with Ed Sullivan. That's kind of common sense. I mean, everybody did. And about a quarter of them told me the same story about sitting on that landing, the parents not knowing and watching what was going on downstairs.
So
Yes.
Von Meter looked exactly like John Kennedy,
Yes.
and he did an album which was a spoof on the First Family, and Buck Henry was one of the writers, and they did sketches of, like, Jackie was infamous for giving tours of the White House. So, John would be somewhere in the house and he would meet up with her, and she'd be in the bathroom, and then she would talk about all the toys that were surrounding the tub for John, and Caroline. And then Von Meter would come out and say, and the rubbish one is mine. So I started doing John Kennedy when I was like 6 years old.
Wow.
And then I built up this repertoire. I did John Wayne, I did Humphrey Bogart. I just did guys, which was kind of my shtick. And Mac Robbins, he had a son who worked for some commercial agency, and he thought it was the cutest thing in the world that this 6-year-old was doing impressions and doing them really well. So he brought me. He set up a meeting for me with the head of the agency, and I have 3 older brothers, so they took me into the city, and I'm in the waiting room, and some I guess the receptionist comes over and says, he'll see you now. And I said, and then I walked into his office as Humphrey Bogart, and I said, hand over the contract and I'll sign on the dotted line. And I'm 6 years old, and the guy like lost it. And it's, my mom really wasn't a stage mother type of parent. And I had an older sister who was 3 years older than me that wasn't as outgoing as myself at that age. And my mother had put me in an acting school, and it was a workshop. And she started to see that my sister was withdrawing a little bit. So she said, I'll bring your sister with you and she'll come so she'll feel like she's a part of it. But it really wasn't my sister's thing. And my mother was afraid that it was going to damage both of us. It was going to damage my sister, that all this attention was being given to me. And the fact that, at the time, my mother would, people would put these ideas in her head. Oh, Sue's going to like end up on the couch. She's going to have mental problems. If this is something she really wants to do, if it's in her blood, let her do it when she's older. So when I turned 17, and I was, I was always kind of the funny one in the group, and I had a lot of funny friends growing up. I guess, the quintessential class clown. I was always getting in trouble for cracking jokes, making remarks under my breath and, getting in trouble. So when I was 17, my godmother lived in Brooklyn, and one of her neighbors was a wardrobe mistress for films. And she knew that I did impressions and I had interest in, doing comedy. So she told me about a theater group in Manhattan. No, she actually told me about the Improv,
Oh, wow.
and that was the Improv in New York. So, but I had met a group of friends that were part of a theater company, and they were doing a like a variety show. So they were singers, dancers, people reading poetry or whatever. And if you any talent that you had, you can go on stage and do your thing. So I wrote a sketch. It was basically an act. It was a 5-minute act of me doing my impressions, and my shtick was I'm going to do the wives of famous people, but they sound just like their husbands. So I did, Humphrey Bogart's wife and Ed Sullivan's
Oh,
wife.
my God.
And I went to the Improv. This was in, I think it was like 1979.
Wow.
And I had, I stood online back in the day. You had to pick a number.
Oh, yeah.
People lined up like, people line up today, like Christmas time for electronics or whatever. And I got a lower number, and I went on, and I had been performing like my whole life. I always performed in front of company and my friends. So I really wasn't like crazy nervous going on stage. And I did really, really well. And they said I can come back, the following Sunday. So I thought that you had to write a new act
Oh,
every time you went on stage. I wasn't friends with anybody in comedy. I didn't know anything. So I wrote another act, and it wasn't as funny as my original. And they really weren't that interested anymore. And then I just said, you know what? I'm just gonna wait till I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna, take a little time, regroup, and figure out how to really crack into this. And then I ended up moving out to Los Angeles in 1980. I had this horrendous breakup, and I was really depressed. And I was like, I can't even be in Manhattan anymore with this person living here. So I drove cross country with some friends, and then I went to the Comedy Store and auditioned for Mitzi, and I passed.
oh,
And that's when the Belly Room was basically where most of the women comics performed. And I worked there, for you know I don't know, 3 years, a couple of years, whatever. And and then I try to think if I got on at the Improv. I don't really. I think I may have gotten on at the
I
Improv,
know you did because I saw you there quite often. You weren't
but
just
not.
hanging around.
But I don't know how early on. Maybe I did get on like a little bit, but I felt like there was so much competition in Los Angeles during that time, the early 80's. And I just felt like I need to get stage time. That was the most important thing in the world. So I was working, still had a day job. I was working for a lawyer. I was a legal secretary. I knew nothing about law. I just answered an ad in the LA Times, and this was what hooked me. It was crazy lawyer looking for crazy secretary, flexible hours, called Marvin.
Wow.
So I called him up. I went in for an interview. He was probably like 6 years older than me, really, really handsome guy, funny. I am still friends with him to this day.
Ah,
And he said, all right, okay. And then I never heard from him, but I knew that he really liked me. I had such a great interview with him. And so I called him and I said, I'm so surprised I didn't hear back from him. He says, oh, you got the job. He said, come in Monday. No, take the day off Monday, come in Tuesday. So that launched like a 4-year job, But what was great about it was that I wasn't making enough money. Um, I got like one gig or two gigs, and I wasn't making enough money to quit my job. But he always let me leave. Like if I got a week gig, he would let me go just as
Wow.
long as I replaced myself with somebody.
Beautiful.
So he was very, very influential in me being able to chase my dream. And then finally, I got a bunch of bookings at a series of colleges. It was like 2 months on the road or something like that. And I
How'd you
left.
get that? How'd you get that?
I got it. I believe, I guess I had a manager. Well, Gail Stocker. Remember
Oh
Gail
yeah,
Stocker?
sure, sure, sure.
Okay. Gail, Gail was my manager, and she got me a bunch of gigs.
Oh, beautiful.
And I moved. I left LA and I went back to New York, and I still kind of knew people from when I was, young comic, in the early days there. And I landed at the Comedy Cellar and got in there. And then I auditioned for the Improv, and I didn't get in, I think, the first time, which was devastating. And then I auditioned
Silver?
for Silver again, and I got in. And that was, I guess, that was kind of my home club. And worked there, worked Catch a little bit, but mostly the Improv and the Comedy Cellar. And then other clubs started to sprout. So the Comic Strip, and then Stand Up New York, and then the Road. And then I just started getting booked. I started doing like those those NACA conventions. I did really, really well. It's kind of like for a lot of people who don't know, it's like a flea market of of
Fired.
entertainment and buyers. Yes. So I got booked on a ton of those, and they were great because she made great money,
Wow.
one night. Some of it was very grueling. You can get like 3 or 4 colleges in one area, and you would rent a car and you would go from place to place, and it was lonely, and but you were making great money, and that's what mattered. And then I was just getting so much better being on the road. And then
So you basically were kind of a loner in this. You didn't have middle acts that you traveled with. You got in a car kind of by yourself.
Right, right. And sometimes I was lucky. I would get booked in a place where I knew people. Like I had a girlfriend whose parents lived in Columbus, Ohio, and I had got a gig at a school there. And then I stayed at their house. I had cousins that lived in South Carolina. I got booked at schools there, stayed with them. So that aspect of it was fun. And I was on the road for, oh God, I don't know, 20 years or something like that.
Wow.
It's got to be. And
Wow.
and
Maybe
then
that's why we never really got, I mean, we knew each other, obviously, but
mhm,
maybe that's why we never were like friends because you really weren't there that much.
right. But in the early days of the Improv, you talked about it being the place. That was my social life.
Yeah,
And even if I weren't going on, I was always there. I was
absolutely.
always at a comedy club, no matter what. And then sometimes people didn't show up, or someone canceled, and it's like, hey, Kolinsky, go on. Um,
How lucky were we to have that improv where if you wanted a drink, you could be at the bar and talk to whoever. And you walk in and there's the restaurant that they put together. Good
mhm.
pizza. Remember that good pizza after a
Pizza was
while?
great. That Jackie Mason, remember Jackie
Jackie
Mason
Mason,
was
exactly.
the own that.
And,
Yeah.
and to this day, I see clear as day uh, the Robinsons, the dad and the son,
Oh,
and
at the table, at Bud's table, the
and
round table.
Jerry, and just it was like I'm there 40 years ago. It was amazing to see.
Well, it was a second family. I mean,
Yeah,
it really, really was. And even when I see comedians now that I haven't seen in a long time because I don't, really do stand up anymore, um, it's a family that you're always going to be a part of. I remember bumping into Eddie Murphy when he was already famous, but I hadn't seen Eddie because I knew Eddie when he first started. He
oh
was
that's
like
oh my God, you're both
16.
from Belmore.
Well, he's not from Belmore, but there was a club in Long Island called Richard's
Right,
Dixon's White House Inn,
right,
and that's where Eddie and Bobby Collins and Bobby Nelson and
right.
Klaus Meyer, who Jim Myers, Richie Minervini. That's where I met all those guys. Rob Bartlett and Eddie. I don't know. I said he was 16, but he may have even been younger than that. He may have been like 15. And I bumped into Eddie in front of the Improv. I mean, now it's probably like 30 years ago, but he said, Sue, and he came over and gave me a big hug and a kiss. And that's just something that I'll always have, you know?
Hey, you were right there in the beginning. I mean, you were solid right there with everybody. You were in the trenches. People don't forget that.
yeah, yeah. So that was, it was, it was such a special time. And, um, like you say, lucky. I mean, I feel so fortunate to have been a part of that part of stand up because it was the surge after like Elaine Boozler and Robert Klein and that whole crowd. Like we were the next generation.
Right.
And it was just fun and liberating, and you worked when you wanted to work. I never ever thought, oh, I'm never going to get a gig again. It's like you always worked. And then I started doing USO shows, so I did a lot in the country, and then I went overseas, and
Wow.
I saw the world
Wow.
as a stand-up comedian.
Oh my
I
God.
went to Bahrain, I went to United Arab Emirates, I went all through
Wow.
Japan and Europe, and I went to Yugoslavia. I mean, I went to Greenland. I mean, it was just amazing.
So you're introducing something here that I really haven't heard before. So let's stay with this. What were the audiences like in those different places? Walk me through five or six of those places that you just mentioned. Was there a difference? Did you have to approach those audiences differently? I'm sure a lot of them didn't know you. Maybe some of them knew you. Tell me about that.
Depending on the base that we performed at, sometimes you had to be squeaky clean, which I mean, I really didn't have a problem with. I mean, I did have, aspects of my act that, were definitely adult. But the audiences were amazing because, for lack of a better term, they were captive. They didn't have any entertainment. Here they were Americans, they were away from home. So to see other Americans, whether they knew you or not, you were comics, and it was comforting, and it was a taste of something that they yearned for. And I'll tell you a great story. We were in Yugoslavia, and we did a show. It was like Bob Hope on a flatbed truck at
Wow.
a MASH unit.
Wow.
And we were performing in places where, I mean, there were landmines. We got warned when we got out of our van that there were live mines. And if you had to be very, very careful where you walk, like even if you saw like a little patch of grass coming out of cement, um, don't walk on it. I don't care if it's like a couple of blades.
Wow.
Um, so that kind of stuff was really, freaky. There was bombing going on because we were doing our shows during the Gulf War. So so when we went to Yugoslavia, I mean, there was you could hear bombing like maybe 10, 20 miles away.
Wow.
And then we went to Kuwait um, after it had ended, and they took us on this road. And it was the road that Saddam was driving down when he was bombing all of like tanks and jeeps. And I have these pictures of us standing in front of all of this, like all of these blown up
Wow.
vehicles,
Wow.
and with graffiti written all over it. And yeah, it was really just so special. And I like bonded with there's actually a couple of guys that I met that we're Facebook friends now.
Wow.
And this was, I was in my, I guess my mid 20s, when I first started doing it. And it was just an incredible experience. And, like we went to Greenland, and it was light the
Yikes.
entire time. And I
Yeah.
had never ever been in that type of environment. So you go in to the show at 8 o'clock at night, and you come out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
There was a ritual that everyone who was all of the military personnel had to do during their tour, and it was a polar bear club, right? So it was myself and two other comics, and they asked us if we wanted to jump in the Arctic.
Wow. Oh
And
my
there's
God.
icebergs. I mean, the water, it was like just above freezing.
Oh my
Okay.
God.
I said, okay, I'll do it because you got a certificate. So they picked me up at like 8 o'clock in the morning, and the only bathing suit I had a two-piece bathing suit, and they drive me down. There was a priest and a doctor on the shore, and you had to run in. You had to get your head wet, and I did it, and I came out, and they wrapped me up in a wool blanket, and I have my certificate, but it was the coolest thing in the world. So you got to do like, I drove a Humvee. I was in like, I didn't go in a fighter plane, and I flew in all of these like military helicopters, and
Wow.
um, it was just, I had dinner with Bedouins in the desert in the United Arab Emirates. I mean, it was just an incredible time.
So, I've interviewed, like I said, well over 2 dozen fantastic comedians, a lot of the people you've already mentioned. But you've got a unique story here. This is really, really something. I'm thrilled to hear this. One of the great things about doing this show is not only do I get to document things like this for everyone to hear for months and years to come, and but I get to learn about you. I would never know any of this stuff. I just know you're a Met fan, and a rabid one at that. I mean, who wouldn't be living out where you did? And you and I grew up with the Amazons. I mean,
Right.
it was a crazy, crazy time. But having this knowledge about you and your life is phenomenal, and people are going to remember this show. So, did you have any moments with your material that is different? You remember any moments when you were on stage when your material just killed and you were like, "Whoa, this is fantastic"?
Oh God. Oh, so many times. Thank God I have more of those memories than the other way around. When the remote control first came out, it sounded like I'm 90 years old. Um, I had a bit about how men control the TV, and it's that remote. I'm not going to do my set, but that was the source of a lot of laughs. And I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of my stuff was very relatable. And then I kind of started to do a lot of topical material much later in my career. And that I loved because it really forced you to write a lot more, because then the material was dated. Um, but on the flip side, I had experiences, and this is probably one of the most special times that I ever had on the road. I got booked to open for Rosemary Clooney in
Wow.
a theater in the Round
Ooh.
in Massachusetts, in a very provincial area. And here I am. I'm a Jewish comedian. I am not Rosemary Clooney's audience by any stretch of the imagination. But what agents would do a lot of the times, we were from the same agency. They would package a show. So without even thinking whether it was right for me, it was money and it was prestige, but it was really difficult. So the first night, the way Rosemary at this part of time in her career, she would open the show and sing, for maybe 20 minutes or so. And then she would take a break and I would come on, do my set, which was supposed to be, I guess, like 40 minutes. And then she would come back on and close the show. And so the first night, I didn't get to meet her. And the stage is revolving, which is not easy,
Wow.
even if you are really good at what you're doing and they are your audience. So I had a really, really horrible set.
Wow.
Like, like I wanted to go back to my hotel room and cry. It was terrible.
Wow.
So I called up my manager, and she said that she had heard from the guy who booked the show, and he didn't think that I was right for the show either. And I talked a bit about being Jewish because, that was part of my act. And if I had to do a long set, I didn't have enough material to not do that material. So I said to my manager, "You really have to get me out of here because I really don't think I can do this week. I mean, it's going to be, I'm just not the right act, and it's going to be really, really hard and painful." So we made an agreement with the guy who booked me that I would cut my set down to 20 minutes, take out all the Jewish material, and see what happens. So the next night I show up, and Rosemary comes into my stupid dressing room, which was like a closet, right? Walk-in closet. And she had watched my act the night before. And she said, "I heard you want to leave, and I'm begging you not to leave.
Wow.
You are very, very funny. They didn't get you last night, but you'll get them. And I know you're going to do a little less time." She said, "Please stay because I love you
Wow.
and I really want to spend this week with you." I was like, "Oh my God," I just got like the chills. And I went out that night and it was better. And then it got better and better and better. And I kind of acclimated to the crowd. But the coolest thing is that I got to hang out with her. We went out to dinner,
Wow.
and she told all of these great stories about her relationship with Jose Ferrar.
Wow.
And she was saying that when she was younger and she was married to Jose, they used to vacation on barges, and they used to hang out with, their best friends were Boris Karloff and Boris Karloff's wife. And I went, "Whoa, whoa, whoa,
Wow.
whoa." I said,
Wow.
"You were friends with Boris Karloff?" And she said, "Yeah, he was like one of our best friends." I said,
Wow.
"What was he like?" She said, "He was very funny. He had a great sense of humor."
Wow.
So when I look at my career, the things that really stand out to me are working with Rosemary Clooney. I got to work with Milton Berle.
Ah.
He hosted a Friars Club event with myself, Richard Belzer, and a couple of other comedians I don't remember. And I got to hang out with Milton Berle. I did Bob Hope's Young Comedian special, so I got to hang
Whoa.
out with Bob Hope at his house.
Whoa.
Phyllis Diller was on the
Toluca Lake,
special.
right?
Huh?
Toluca Lake.
Toluca Lake, and I'm a golfer, and he had a par three hole on his property. So I
Wow.
brought one of my irons, and I was hitting balls off the tee,
Wow.
and hanging out with Bob Hope and Phyllis
Wow.
Diller, and I got to be kind of friendly with Phyllis Diller through a mutual friend of mine, Henriette Mantel, who was very, very good friends with Phyllis. So I got to go to Phyllis's house. She hosted a lunch with a bunch of women comics and comedy writers, and we had lunch and we had drinks with her, and she told like a trillion stories about when she first started and the people she hung out with. And she had a very close relationship with Bob Hope. He was very influential in her career.
Wow.
And so it's people like that. And I mean, I got to be very friendly with Jay Leno over the years, and I opened for Jay. And it's just the people that have come into my life because of what my career, where my career brought me, is truly amazing. And it's something, like I said to you before, it's a special club that I am forever grateful to be a part of.
And so I know when we spoke on the phone that you mentioned that something shifted for you, and you decided to do less stand up, or to stop stand up. Tell me about that time. Were things happening in another direction, or were you not liking the way comedy was headed? What was that like for you?
I got to a point in my stand-up career where I felt like this was when a lot of comedians were having shows developed based on their persona. And I felt like no one was going to do that with me. I didn't feel like I was that type of comic. I didn't have that personal Roseanne story or Ray Romano story or, even, Jerry, which was not really his personal life, but I just felt like it wasn't going to happen for me. And I was spending a lot of time on the road and it was getting really old
Mm.
and really lonely. I was in a long relationship and I felt like I there's got to be something else out there. And I had a girlfriend who was a writer, and we were really, really great friends. I met her at Stand Up New York. She was a waitress at Stand Up New York when
Wow.
I first met her. And we weren't friendly outside the club. It's so funny how sometimes you have friends that are only like, it's like a geographical thing. She was my Stand Up New York waitress friend, but we never socialized outside the club. And I moved out to LA again. Because I could live there, came back and went back and forth. And I moved back to LA in 91. So I met up with her when I moved back out. And she found out through someone who knew me. We had a mutual friend that I had moved out to LA. So she contacted me and we were hanging out and then we just started talking about writing and she said maybe we should write some spec scripts together and see if we can get a writing job. So we wrote this is when Ellen was doing her series, so we wrote an Ellen, we wrote a Mad About You, and
Cool.
then we wrote a Larry Sanders.
Oh, I love Larry Sanders' show.
But I think it was based on our two, our Mad About You and Ellen. We signed with CAA,
Oh,
which was like unbelievable. And then we got a job writing on Brotherly Love, which was the Lawrence brothers. And you remember Jimmy Valley and Jonathan Schmuck, the
sure,
Funny Boys.
sure.
So ironically, Jimmy and John, they were big showrunners at the time.
Oh,
And but ironically, they were the first comedians I met standing online in New York
oh my God.
the first time at the Improv.
Oh my God.
So I had developed a friendship with them and, a little more with Jimmy than Jonathan. So they gave me my first writing job,
Wow.
which was, it was just, for shirt.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so we wrote on that, and it only lasted the show had gone from NBC to the WB. We wrote on it when it was on the WB, and then it didn't get picked up again. And then after that, we were, figured, okay, we have this one job under our belt, and we wrote a Larry Sanders spec
Oh,
script.
I love that show. That was great.
Oh God. And it was great. It was probably the best thing that we had written thus far. And then we heard that we went to, it was so crazy how things happen. We went to a taping. Dice Clay was doing a pilot. So I don't know how we ended up going, but we went and we bumped into this woman who was a writer, young writer. And Nicole and I, my writing partner, we had developed an idea for a show about two women who lived in New York, who were in their mid 30s and just like still didn't kind of have it together yet career wise. And we were kind of pitching the idea to this young writer. And she said, HBO is doing a show with four women.
Mm-hmm.
It's called Sex in the City.
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, oh, damn, that kind of stinks, even though it wasn't exactly the same thing. But we said, all right, well, maybe we should see if we can get a job on it. So called up our agent, told him about the show, and then found out that someone that Nicole and I both knew, but someone who I was really good friends with, Michael Patrick King, who I knew from my stand-up days.
Oh my
And,
God.
Michael was, struggling writer, comedian. I actually co-signed his first credit card. That's how poor he was. And so we found out, Michael was one of the showrunners with Darren Starr, who did
Oh my God. Yeah.
90210.
Sure.
And my agent said, they're not interviewing anybody. And we said, you got to get us a meeting. We are New Yorkers who know this world so well. And I know Michael. So they were like, nah, they're really not. They're just not seeing anybody. So Carolyn Strauss, who I'm sure you remember, she was, big executive at HBO. And I knew Caroline, ever since I was doing stand-up. And she was always a big fan of mine. And I called up Caroline personally. And I said, you have to get us a meeting. She said, Sue, they're not seeing anybody. I said, Caroline, you just have to get us in. We'll do the work. Just get us in. So we got a meeting. And we gave them our Larry Sanders script. And, they loved it. And Michael knew me and loved me. And the meeting went really, really well. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to say on the show, but I'll say it. And if you can't use it, you don't use it. But I believe that this totally sealed the deal of getting the gig. As we were leaving, Michael looked at me and looked at us and said, what do you think about anal sex? And I said, only if Quaaludes are involved. And he laughed so hard. And then we walked out. And
Very funny. Very funny.
I know that was influential because they were looking for that kind of stuff. So anyway, so I got a job. We got a job on that, and we wrote on that for a season. And then my partner she didn't want to be a partner anymore. She wanted to write by herself. So we split up, and we didn't get hired back as solo writers. And I kind of floundered a little bit. I didn't know what I was going to do. I really liked writing with somebody, and I, was like trying to write spec scripts by myself, and I was just getting frustrated. And at the time, as a stand-up, I was still doing stand-up, just not as much. I used to get invited to celebrity golf events and ski events, and you would go for a weekend, and it was, all
Beautiful.
expenses paid.
Beautiful.
Per diem. You get to hang out with like Samuel Jackson and, Josh Charles and all these really cool actors. I got to hang out with, Tony Childs and, oh God, who else was there? Sylvester Stallone. I mean, it was crazy. I was at breakfast with Sylvester Stallone.
Wow.
Anyway, so, and I golfed. So it was really, really cool. Anyway, so I do these events, and one of the events was an annual thing that I did for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years in a row. Richard Karn from Home Improvement, his mother had cancer, and he would do these like charity events, and it mushroomed into like a 5-day thing with a golf tournament, which they always had, and then a softball game, and you only had to do one show on Friday night. That's it. But everybody who was there came to the show.
Wow.
Right. So Sylvester Stallone could see you do stand up. I mean,
Wow.
It was really amazing. And those crowds were incredible. I mean, I was like in heaven and never had a bad show. I mean, it was great.
Wow.
So, George Lopez performed. This is before George was like a big, big deal. Guys like Alan Havey, Kathy Ladman, Paul Provenza. I mean, it was amazing. So there's a guy who ironically is I do a podcast now. He's my podcast partner, Steve Mason, had a sports talk show in San Diego. And he came up to Seattle to do his sports talk show remotely. And he had a partner, John Ireland, who's a big, big deal out here in LA. He calls Lakers games. So he saw me. Oh, so there was the big celebrity softball game. I got invited because I know a lot about baseball. I got invited to go up to the booth And I invited Kathy Ladman to come with me,
Oh, wow.
and Mark Harmon was
Wow.
there, and Steve. So we're all, doing color commentary and doing the game together. And that was the first time I met Steve. And Steve and I hit it off famously. And I guess like later in the day, or that night, I'm like walking around the lobby and I bump into him, and he said, "Do you want to come on my show tomorrow morning?" Um, and I said, "Who canceled?" Because I was like the least famous person of everybody who was there. And he said, "Oh, stop it." He said, "No, no, no. I really want you. I want a comedian on the show." And I said, "Okay." And then he told me that I had to be there at like 6 in the morning. And I said, "No, really, who
Ooh,
canceled?" Because
ooh.
6 o'clock in the morning,
Talking to a
nobody, none
comedian.
of these celebrities are getting up at that hour. So I went on his show and we had a blast. And I just developed this really, really fun relationship with him. And when we got back to LA, he had a live show that he did as well on Fox Sports West. So he invited me on that, and then I became a regular on Fridays. He coined my name, Crazy Sue Kolinsky, and I would come on and do like a trivia segment, like a goofy trivia segment. And the thing that was funny about it, when he first had me on, he asked me to come up with a trivia question. And I didn't know what the answer was. I just gave the question, right? So the question was, who had the most saves on the Dodgers up until now, whatever. And that was my trivia question. So all these people are calling in, and I'm just thinking, Steve's the sports guy. He'll let them know that they're not right, right? And he was doing that. No one guessed it. So
Tom
finally,
Niedenfuer.
well, maybe it could have been. It could have been. I don't even remember. And then Steve said to me, "Who is it?" And I said, "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know? You came up with the question." I said, "You asked me to come up with a question. You didn't tell me I needed to have the answer." I said, "You're the sports guys." So it became a running joke. And years later, when I became a regular on his show, I bought a book, and I don't know if you'll remember it. I have it somewhere on my shelf. It was written in like 19, I guess I think it was like 1980 or something. And it was a lot of Mets trivia, but it was a baseball trivia book. And one of the questions um, dated the book, but I didn't even pay attention to that. And the question I gave was, "What is the oldest baseball stadium?" Now, according to this book that was copywritten in 1986, it was Tiger Stadium. But since then, Tiger Stadium had been torn down.
Chicago, right?
I think it was Wrigley or Fenway, but it was probably Wrigley.
Mm-hmm.
So all these people are calling in, same thing. And then I give the answer, and Steve and his partner are laughing hysterically. And they're like, "It's not even around anymore." So it became the joke that whenever I'd ask a question, it would be like, "What is the answer to this as of 1986?" So it became kind of a fun thing. And now we're 20 years later. We had a morning radio. That's another part of my career, based on my relationship with Steve. Um, and it's a roundabout way of bringing this up. After Sex in the City ended and I didn't know what I wanted to do, Steve got offered a morning radio show on WNEW in New York,
Wow.
the
Wow.
iconic station that I grew up listening to.
Wow.
And it was a rock station that was slowly going through a transformation of becoming all talk. So they asked him to recommend somebody, and I found out just recently they wanted to pair him up with Jimmy Kimmel, and Jimmy decided that it wasn't really the direction where he wanted to go in his career. So Steve suggested me, a comedian from New York, and they just hired me sight unseen on
Wow.
his recommendation.
Wow.
And I flew to New York and met with them, and they already gave me the job, but I had I got a gig at Caroline's when I was there, and they all came to see me. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I already got the job.
Uh-oh.
If I better have a good set. And it was one of those magical nights, and I
Oh,
had an incredible set. And so they were happy that they hired me. And I did morning radio, and it morphed into just talk, like probably halfway through. And we did morning radio. We were opposite Howard Stern, which was very challenging.
wow.
But we did that for a year and a half. And then we decided to not renew our contracts. He wasn't happy there, and I was away from home, and my boyfriend lived in LA, and then we moved back, and 3 months later, I broke up with my boyfriend.
Hmm.
Anyway, and then my career kind of went into a reality TV direction.
Let's hear about this, because certainly nothing is more, watched than reality TV right now.
Carol Leifer had a friend. His name is Dave Boone, who was a big comedy writer. He actually writes on a lot of award shows, and at the time, he was doing crazy shows like Cheating Spouses Caught on Tape,
Oh yeah.
writing the narration
Oh
basically
yeah.
for the host. And he had asked Carol if she wanted to do it, and she turned it down, but she recommended me. So I got a job on that, and it was, I shake my head, but I really had a great time because they let us kind of go off in a direction that I was surprised that they let us, go,
It was
because
funny. It was a funny show.
we were funny people. So one of the things, one of the situations was it was a real estate agency, and the person who owned the real estate agency thought that someone was stealing. So they put up surveillance cameras, and lo and behold, there was a couple that was there after hours, and the guy was sitting in a folding chair. So they pan around, and you see all these computers. They were stealing, I guess, computers and computer equipment. They pan around, you see all these computers, and then you see this guy sitting in a folding chair, and the woman's head is obviously in his lap. So the copy I wrote was the man sitting in the chair is a real estate agent. The woman whose head is who you can't see or whatever um, um, is raking in the commission or something like that, right? So, and I thought they're never gonna ever let that go through, but they did. So it ended up being a really fun gig, and I stayed with the company. We did like, and then it was like shows like like Who Wants to Date a Prince, like all these crazy. This was after like Who Wants to Marry a Millionaire. It was the same company, I guess, that did that, and so they got some prince who was. I mean, he was an actual
Oh
prince,
yeah, I think I saw that.
but he wasn't like he was a prince in some town that like nobody knew of, and he was really short. So not to make fun of someone who's really short, but it was hard not to, because all these like really really tall women were vying for his love, and it was such a ridiculous situation because these women had never ever met him, and they built this setup on stage where he was up in like it looked like a tree house kind of, and you couldn't see him. He was obscured, um, but you saw like a window and like a shadow of him, and these women would come out one by one and profess their love for him, and they never even met him, and some of these women were like crying how they had to marry him. It was so ridiculous. So and then I worked on like Sexiest Bachelor, and I worked on like some robot. It was kind of like Robotica, but um, like Battle Bots. It was called Robotica, but it was Amit Zappa was the host, and he was hysterical and great. So I stayed there for a while, and then I got back into writing TV. I got a job on Ellen DeGeneres's second sitcom, and I got that basically through Carol Leifer. She was one of the showrunners. it was a horrible experience. I wasn't happy there at all. I didn't hit it off with Ellen. She was really not nice to me. I can go on another hour about my time there, but it was just really, really bad. So, a fellow comedian, Jeff Stillson, who I'm sure you remember from, you
I don't.
remember
I don't.
Jeff was a brilliant, brilliant comedian and, great joke writer. Worked on Letterman and worked on Chris Rock show. And he would come in one day a week and help punch up the show when I was working on Ellen. And he knew how miserable I was. He had co-created the Osbournes,
Yeah.
and they were looking for one more segment producer.
Wow.
And a mutual friend of ours had recommended me. And my option had been picked up on the Ellen show once, and it was up again, and it looked like it probably wasn't going to happen. And I told the showrunners, Carol and the other guy, I said, look, don't fight for me. I'm not happy here. I don't want to be here. And the show was brutal. I mean, because she was just so horrible, and she never liked anything anybody wrote, and we had to rewrite stuff all the time. I was there till like 6 o'clock in the morning on many occasions.
Jeez.
It was really, and I thought, you know what? I got a job in show business, a writer on a television series. I should be having fun.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is ridiculous. So I got a job on the Osbournes, which was the greatest job I've ever had in my life.
So
chasing that high for the past 20 something years. And I worked on that the whole time. And then I worked on Newlyweds, which was great. Stayed at MTV and worked on a bunch of stuff. And then just, got a job on Top Chef, worked on Top Chef for years. And then, just kind of stayed in the reality world. And it's kind of where I am now. I just finished doing a show last year called Best Leftovers Ever, which is currently streaming on Netflix. And that was a great experience. And doing a podcast with Steve Mason called the Culture Pop Podcast, where we do interviews with, writers, directors, actors, comics, and that's basically where I'm at right now.
Wow. Boy, what a career. Goodness gracious. I'm happy for you.
Thanks. It's been a fun ride.
Well, I mean, if the 99% of the people that are going to be watching this are going to be saying, wow, what a life. So, hey, listen, congratulations. I just wish that we could have gotten a little friendlier when we were, both hanging out at the Improv, so I would have been able to track you a little closer. But this has been great. I'm so glad that you accepted my invitation to be on the show. And, such great people have already been on the show. Kathy Ladman was last week, and we had a great time. And Paul Pavenza is going to be doing the show the next week or so. And Murray Langston is going to be doing the show. So it's been great. It's an unbelievable opportunity to record history, to let everybody know about the personalities and your life. So, hey, I want to thank you so much for doing the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And again, what a great show. So thank you, everybody, for watching 80's Golden Age of Comedy. My name is Bruce Starr. What a great time with Sue Kolinsky. We'll see you all again, everybody.